Home, the place we think is the safest place. A private space where you can relax, fall asleep, and not worry about the outside world. But what if I told you, you might not actually be alone? What if right above your head, in the dark attic, or right below your feet, in the cold basement, something or someone is lurking in the shadows, silently watching you without you even knowing it? Tonight, I'm going to tell you 3 true stories that will probably make you never dare look into your attic or walk down to your basement alone again. Stay until the end, because you might have to look again at every corner of your home after hearing these. And if you're brave enough, comment on which place you're most afraid of a stranger showing up, the attic or the basement. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare to be haunted by sleepless nights. Story 1. The Basement Reflection. When I was a kid, my basement was a place of both excitement and fear. It was where my brother and I kept our PlayStation 2, and we spent hours there, lost in a world of video games. The basement was nothing special, just a large open room with old carpet, dim lighting, and a single couch in front of the TV. But there was something about it that always made me feel uncomfortable, especially when I was alone. It was a typical Saturday night when my parents were out, leaving me home alone. My brother was staying at a friend's house, so I had the whole place to myself. Of course, I headed straight for the basement, eager to dive into the latest game I was obsessed with. The basement, with its low ceilings and musty smell, didn't seem so bad as I focused on the screen, battling the virtual world. I was deep in the game when I heard that noise, a small noise, almost like footsteps, somewhere behind me. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly brushed it off as if the house was collapsing or something trivial, to drown out the annoying noise. I turned up the volume on the TV and continued playing, trying to get lost in the game once more. Time passed, and the more I played, the less I thought about the noise. The game became intense, and I was completely immersed when the screen suddenly went black, signaling a loading screen. That's when I saw it, the reflection. Right there on the pitch-black screen, I could see myself sitting on the couch. But that wasn't all I saw. Standing about 15 feet away from me was the shadowy figure of a man. He just stood there looking at me. My blood ran cold as I stared at the reflection, too scared to turn around. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. My body froze in place, my eyes locked on the dark figure behind me. The game loaded to the next level, and bright colors flooded the screen again, breaking the reflection, but the damage was done. I knew there was someone in the basement with me. I forced myself to keep playing, but my mind was no longer in the game. I could feel him there, his presence looming over me. I kept expecting him to come closer, to reach out and grab me, but nothing happened. Minutes passed, and I became hyper-aware of every sound, every creak of the floor, every rustle of the old couch beneath me. Finally, another loading screen appeared, and I looked back, hoping, praying that the figure was gone. And he was gone. The place where he had been standing was empty now, leaving only the dim basement behind. But the relief didn't last long. He was still somewhere down there, hidden in the shadows. My survival instincts kicked in, and I knew I had to get out of the basement. I slowly paused the game and turned around, scanning the room. No one was there, but I didn't want to risk it. The stairs to the main floor were just a few steps away. I could get there if I was quick. I didn't hesitate. I bolted out of the chair, sprinted across the room, and up the stairs. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached the top, slamming the basement door behind me and locking it. I called my parents, shaking. From the safety of my bedroom, I explained what had happened, my voice shaking. My parents promised they'd be home soon, and I hid in the corner of the room, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Every second felt like an hour as I waited, listening for any sound that might indicate that the man had followed me upstairs. My parents finally arrived, and I rushed to them, relieved. My dad went down to the basement to check, and I stood at the top of the stairs, holding my breath, afraid of what he might find. But when he came back up, he said there was no one there. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, a trick of the light, or my imagination running wild. But I knew what I saw, the reflection of a man standing behind me, watching. And even though my dad reassured me that the basement was empty, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone there. The next day, I forced myself back into the basement, needing to prove to myself that it was safe. I walked around, checking every corner, every dark corner, and then I saw it, a small window near the ceiling, slightly ajar. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed so obvious. Had he come in through there? And if so, how had he gotten out without me hearing him? I closed the window and stayed as far away from the basement as I could after that. Even after I went down, the memory of that reflection haunted me. The basement, once a place of fun and entertainment, had become something else entirely, a place where darkness could hide, where you were never truly alone. Story 2. The Uninvited Guest in the Attic. About 5 years ago, I moved to a new city for work. I was still trying to get settled, so I rented a small, run-down house with the idea that if I liked the area, I might eventually buy my own place. The house had an upper floor, a basement, and even a small attic, although I didn't pay much attention to it at first. It was the kind of attic you only go into if there was a reason for it. Dark, cramped, and forgettable. For the first month, I barely gave the attic a thought. I was too busy unpacking, getting used to my new job, and exploring the city. The attic was just there, a space I didn't use. The basement was much more practical for storage, so that's where I kept a few unnecessary things. But one day, curiosity got the better of me. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and with nothing else to do, I found myself standing at the small door leading to the attic. I hadn't been up there since I first laid eyes on the house, and even then, I'd only glanced in for a few seconds. I figured, why not? It might be interesting to see what it looked like. The stairs were narrow, creaking with each step as I ascended. When I reached the top, I found the attic door closed just as I'd left it. I slowly opened the door, half expecting to find nothing but dust and cobwebs. The space was even smaller than I remembered, with a slanted ceiling that prevented me from standing upright in most areas. There was almost nothing there, just a few scattered boxes and a large black box pushed against the wall. That's when I realized something that made my heart skip a beat. The box had never been there before. I was sure of it. The last time I'd looked at the house, the attic had been completely empty. But now there was a strange, out-of-place box and something else. On the far wall, in the dim light coming through a small window, I saw what looked like a makeshift bed. Blankets were piled on the floor, a pillow pushed aside. There were clothes too, shirts and pants, crumpled as if someone had just taken them off. A few empty water bottles were scattered around, the same brand I'd bought in bulk. My mind raced, piecing together the horrifying truth. Someone had been living in my attic. But who? And how long had they been there without me knowing? My skin crawled at the thought of someone so close sneaking in and out of the house without my knowing. I backed away slowly, nearly tripping over my own feet as I hurried down the stairs. My heart pounded, adrenaline surging through me as I ran to check the rest of the house. The basement, the bedroom, the kitchen, everything seemed normal, untouched, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Over the next few days, I became hyper-vigilant to every sound, every creak of the old house. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and I began to wonder if I was just being paranoid. Maybe the person had left before I moved in. Still, I couldn't let it go. A week later, I decided to check the attic again, hoping to find it exactly as I'd left it. But when I opened the door, my heart sank. The blankets had been moved, the clothes had been moved, and the water bottles were gone. Someone had been there, and they had been there recently. I immediately alerted the landlord, who came the next day to check. He seemed just as confused as I was and suggested installing security cameras inside the house. I agreed, feeling both relieved and terrified. If someone had indeed been sneaking in and out, we would have at least caught them on camera. 2 days later, we had our answer. The camera footage showed a man who had been in the house casually walking up the stairs to the loft. He stayed there most of the day, only leaving in the early afternoon. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This man had been using my loft as his personal hideout, coming and going without a care in the world. I contacted the police immediately, and they caught him the next day. It turned out he had gotten a key to the house and had been living there long before I moved in. He wasn't aggressive, just a squatter with nowhere else to go, but that didn't make the situation any less terrifying. I moved out soon after, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, not really alone in that house. To this day, I still check every attic, every hidden space wherever I live, just to make sure there isn't someone else lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim that space as their own. Story 3. The Lake House Intruder. A few summers ago, I was invited to spend the weekend at a family friend's lake house. It was the perfect getaway, secluded, peaceful, and surrounded by lush woods. The house itself was an old rustic cabin with creaky wooden floors, antique furniture, and a wraparound porch with a spectacular view of the lake. There were 6 of us, and we arrived late on a Friday night, eager to rest and relax. The first night went smoothly. We spent time around the fire, telling stories and drinking wine until the early hours of the morning. The lake was calm, the sky was blue, and the only sounds were the occasional chirp of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the wind. When we finally decided to go to bed, I was given a small room at the back of the house with a window overlooking the woods. The next day was spent swimming, fishing, and enjoying the sunshine. By evening, we were all exhausted, so we decided to go to bed early. I went to bed around midnight, the events of the day playing over and over in my mind as I drifted off. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was awakened by a noise. It was faint at first, just a light scratching, like a tree branch hitting the window. I ignored it, pulled the covers up to my chin, and tried to go back to sleep, but the noise continued, getting louder and more persistent. It didn't take me long to realize that it wasn't a tree branch. Someone was tapping on the window. My heart began to race as I lay there, paralyzed with fear. The tapping became more rhythmic, almost deliberate, a deliberate attempt to get my attention. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping that if I ignored it, it would go away. But the sound continued, relentless and terrifying. I gathered my courage, slowly turning my head to look at the window. The curtains were slightly ajar, and in the dim light, I could just make out the silhouette of a figure standing outside. The figure was tall, motionless, and facing straight into the room. For a moment, I was too afraid to move, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it one of my friends playing a prank? Or was it someone else, someone who wasn't supposed to be there? The longer I stared, the more certain I was that this wasn't a prank. My first instinct was to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. Instead, I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, careful not to make any noise. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the intruder could hear it. I backed away from the window, not taking my eyes off the figure, and headed for the door. As I reached the doorknob, the knocking stopped. The sudden silence was deafening, and I froze, afraid that any movement would attract the intruder's attention. I waited, holding my breath, but the figure didn't move. It was as if they were waiting for me to do something. Finally, I mustered up the courage to open the door and sneak out into the hallway. I quickly went to my friend's room, shook him awake, and whispered what I had seen. Without hesitation, he grabbed a baseball bat from the corner of the room and led the way back to my bedroom. When we got there, the figure was gone. The windows were closed, the curtains unruffled, as if nothing had happened. We checked the entire house, even stepped outside to look around, but there was no sign of anyone. My friends tried to reassure me, saying that maybe it was just an animal or a trick of the light, but I knew what I had seen. For the rest of the week, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the trees outside sent shivers down my spine. I spent nights lying awake, listening for the knocking, half expecting to see the figure. When we finally left the lake house on Sunday, I felt a sense of relief. I couldn't wait to get back to the city, to the safety of my apartment. But even now, years later, the memory of that night lingers. I can still hear the knocking, still see the shadow outside my window, and I will never forget the terror of knowing that someone or something was watching me from the shadows.